This is a video on how to make homemade sake. I love sake, but what I didn't realize is that it doesn't really require a lot of equipment to make, and while the method is specific, it's actually a pretty simple process if you follow the steps. I've never brewed sake before, so this is my first attempt. I brewed a little bit of beer a couple times, but I tried this sake recipe and it was really fun and incredibly easy. So if you haven't brewed before, this recipe is for you. It's minimal equipment and makes a good amount. So first, the ratio. 160 parts water to 100 parts rice to 25 parts kome koji was the basic ratio that I found and that I used in this recipe. After starting with this ratio, I basically got a cup of water, which is 237 grams, and then I measured out what each addition should be in terms of the water, and then use those numbers to also come up with the grams for the rice and the kome koji. This recipe is a take on the sandan shikomi, which is the 3-stage preparation. And that first stage, 6%, is the mash, and then 13 is the first edition, the 26 is the second edition, and then the 53% is that third and final edition. This table is also in the blog post if you want to look at it again later. All right, prep day coming at you. I posted my chart on a wall so I could reference it. I also set aside some bags with those numbers on it. This is so later on when I was separating all of the rice and the koji into the bags, I had all the numbers right in front of me and I knew very easily what was going into what when I was using the kitchen scale. This is me with the 5 to 6 cups of rice. Again, it doesn't have to be super exact here. We just want to get more than enough. That's a close-up of the rice. It's okay to have a little too much rice as long as you have enough for each of the additions. I'm trying to show you again what the rice looks like and how I rinse it, pour it, rinse it, kind of agitate it, rinse it, and pour it. This does take a little bit of time, but I assure you that it'll help a ton with the taste. This is a really similar process to when you're making sushi rice. The goal is really just to get all the cloudiness out. As you can see here, I'm just rinsing it, agitating it, and then dumping it, rinsing it, agitating it, and dumping it. I made a couple other batches. Some I've washed more, some I've washed less, but that 40 times is what it takes to get it to be really, really clear. We're just trying to get all the impurities out. I'm getting close to the end here, and as you can see, now that I've washed it, it will run quite clear. And then the last thing we want to do, there it is, nice and clear, is let it sit in the fridge overnight for about 12 hours to absorb all the water. Then I celebrate with a LaCroix at the end. All right, step 1, day 1. It's time to steam that rice. So after it's sat in the fridge for a little while, it's now time to steam it and separate it into its first edition, second edition, and third edition, as well as what we're going to use to create the mash. This first time around, I used a pretty thin weave, so I had to double it up. I would recommend getting a tighter weave. I even got some stuff you can reuse and wash. This seemed kind of disposable. There I am. I'm just getting the water ready with my steamer basket. And I wrap the rice in the cheesecloth and get it ready to be steamed. Once I get that going, it is now time to measure out all of the mash, the first edition, the second edition, and the third edition. Here I just measured out the first kome koji for the mash, and now I'm doing the first edition here. I tried to be as exact as possible with the kitchen scale. so that it's a repeatable recipe. Again, I put the koji in its own little baggie. That's the first edition. You'll see me doing the second and the third edition, so that later on when I add them, it's really easy because they come right out of the freezer. Again, this is me doing the second edition. It's a little bit more, and then there you go. And then you'll see I will also do the third one here, and I'll set those aside, and then I'll add the steamed rice into it. And then all of that will be put into the freezer. There we go. There's my final edition. Now I sanitize everything. I got to get the jar ready. I also sanitize like the pot and a pan so that I could do everything on the counter. I use Star San, as you can see here. We'll link it in the blog and on the YouTube video. Essentially, we're trying to get things so that we, again, no impurities. You can also boil water to sanitize, but this was a lot easier and a lot quicker. Here's me sanitizing the baking sheet so that when I put the rice out on the counter, it's also on a sanitized surface. And while I waited for the rice to boil all the way, I had a little cafecito to pass the time. Steaming the rice takes about 30 to 40 minutes. If you have a rice cooker, you can use that. You can also use an Instant Pot. I've found that this allows the rice to get firm but not too saturated with water. Now I will divide up the rice into the proportions for my mash, my first, second, and third editions. I set aside the smallest amount for the moto or the shubo of the mash first. As you can see, I'm just putting a little bit aside so that I can start off that mash. Then I took my first edition and sorted that out first, and then after I got that one set, I did the second edition, and then after that one I did the biggest and final edition. As you can see here, I kind of smush the rice around and lay it flat, and that's actually important because if it's in a big ball, you'll see in one of the videos it doesn't go in very well. If you smush it down and lay it flat, it mixes the rice and the koji together, and then also it allows for when you pull it out of the freezer and dump it into your jars, it makes it easier to break up if it's in a nice flat, thin layer. And again, you see I'm kind of working it around here and then pushing it flat. And you'll see it later on too in the video. Oh, little cup of the cafecito, and then I think I'm moving on to my last edition here. You can see I measured it on the scale and then put it in the bag. One of the things I learned is that if you get a bigger basket on the scale and just scoop your rice right into the baggies on the scale, it actually was a lot easier and a lot less messy. So as my last edition, I'm kind of shaking it up and squishing it. And as you can see in a second here, these are my first, second, and then the third edition, all in different size bags for use later on in the brewing process. I'll put them in the freezer so they're ready to go when I need them. Next up, we set aside that first little bit to make the mash. This happens on the same day. And as you can see here, I got my vessel, I've got my measuring cup, I put the rice in, a little bit of yeast nutrient for later on for the yeast. There it is. Blow! That is the dry kome koji. I did not rehydrate that and dumped it in there. And then for this, the mash here, it's really a half a cup of water. It doesn't seem like a ton of water, but it will be absorbed as you'll see later on in the video. Shaploosh, there you go. I did mix this just to make sure it was evenly distributed in the water. Make sure you sanitize a spoon if you are going to do this. And then I opted for the old school here. I just took the cheesecloth, doubled it up, so that nothing could get in there, but it still was able to breathe naturally through the cheesecloth with the surrounding air. And there's my rubber band, and then we let it sit for 48 hours. We don't add any yeast yet. We want to let the kome koji enzymes and the rice sit for 2 days so that the kome koji can start to break down the rice and turn it into sugar. It will look chunky at first before the rice absorbs all the water. There's that chunky stage. So now after we let it sit out for a few days, we're on to day 3. We're going to actually start the fermentation. So after 2 days, the koji has eaten a lot of the rice and it is incredibly soupy. So now it's time to add the yeast. I had to rehydrate mine. There's a couple different types of yeast you can use. That'll be in the blog. But as you can see, once it's rehydrated, we just dump it in. And that goes right into the refrigerator to cool off for about 12 hours. This is after it comes out. And you can see the yeast is starting to react already. So we'll stir that up to try and make sure that it's mixed pretty well. And then we let it sit at room temperature for 3 days. This stage is called the odori, which is the dance stage, which, as far as I can tell, is just when the koji and the rice and the yeast are all dancing together and making sure we're starting to create some alcohol. So after 3 days, this is what it'll look like, and we are ready to start to build up the mash. All right, so again, this is step 5, day 7. It's our first addition. So we pull that out of the freezer and just add it in, as you'll see here. You don't have to do a ton of mixing. And then we will put it in the refrigerator and let it sit in the cold for 5 days. And since we've done everything beforehand, we just add the rice and the koji, add our water, give it a little stir around. That's what it looks like after the hatsuzoi, or the first edition. And then we put it in the fridge for 5 days. Now we're ready for our second edition. I usually take out the rice and the koji from the freezer at the same time that I take the vessel out of the refrigerator in the morning, and I let it sit all day. And then at the end of the day, I'm ready to add my rice and koji as well as the water. At this point, the vessel should be about halfway full. And as you can see here, the rice went in pretty easily. And then I'll add that water. And then we let it sit in the refrigerator for another 5 days and let it do its thing. Here's a quick look at the nakazoe, so the half full jar before we put it in the fridge. After we let it sit in there for 5 days, we're on day 17, so we're ready for our final addition. So we take it out, and again, I like to take out the rice and koji earlier, but you can take a look at that. So it's on its way. The biggest bag is tough. If you don't let it thaw out, it can be a little hard. But, you get your 4 cups of water. I poured that in there first this time. And then you can see how hard it is. You can see me miss a little bit with a gallon bag. But I do my best. And, the smaller the batches, the harder this will be. That's why a wide mouth glass, I got some on the floor there, is better. But you can see it is full up now, and it is ready to sit in the fridge for its last 2 weeks of brewing. Most of the hard work is done at this point, but we do have to press it out. This was a tricky process. My first mistake was using trying to press it into the jar. So as you can see here, we got the jar and we used a small strainer. Yep, there it is. So we tried to do that, and we tried to pour it right into another gallon jug. And I'm just going to tell you right now, that did not work. If you're going to do this, you want to get a big strainer, and we ended up using, as you can see later, a much bigger receptacle with a wide mouth. Because look, we start pouring, and immediately we're like, oh, this is not going to fit. You can see I lift it up here, and there's just sake going all over the side and down onto the counter. So we had to quick adjust this and try something new. You can see here we used a much wider mouth pot and a much larger strainer. The other thing I would say is this is one of the first pressings, and there wasn't really a lot of the cheesecloth to grab onto. So later on, we used a much bigger thing of cheesecloth, as you can see here. And this is one of our later pressings. So this one goes way smoother, as you'll see. We were basically able to pour the entire contents of the jug into the strainer. And I would even say later on, we refined this process even more, where we poured it all in and didn't press it at all, and then separated that out. So we had a much clearer batch. And then when we pressed it, we got a lot less, and that second batch was pretty cloudy. The less cloudy it is, the better it tastes, in my opinion, but some people might like the cloudy sake. But, the other thing I would say is that this cheesecloth was really had a wide spacing, and we got a much thinner, tighter weave later on, so we could really press out all of the liquid. Once it is pressed, all there's left to do is let it the sedimentation happen, which is you just decant it into a sanitized gallon jug and then put it in the refrigerator. And then, as you'll see, all the sediments will fall to the bottom, and then you can siphon it out and start to fill the bottles. Here's a great look. There's my second batch in there, but here's a great look at the sedimentation that you can see. Again, as we got better, the sediments at the bottom got less and less because we were getting better at just separating it out before we had to press it out. I did a basic siphon, just kind of got it going, and then put the jar up high, and then as you can see, it goes right into the bottle. You can also get a little siphon stopper. I just used my thumb to stop it and kinked it. And again, you can see how clear that one is. This is actually a later batch where we got the sedimentation part a lot better. And then after this, the final step is just to pasteurize it. I haven't tried not pasteurizing it, but if you don't pasteurize it, it only lasts about a month or two. If you do pasteurize it, it can last 6 months to a year. Pasteurizing it was a pretty simple process. As you can see, it's about 8:35 on the time, and I just, got it to like not a heavy boil, but like a simmer, and I left it in there for about 20 minutes, which, as long as the internal temperature is about 160 for 10 to 15 minutes, that's pasteurized. I will say, don't be a dummy like me. I opened up one of the bottles in the middle of the pasteurizing process, and it went all over the place. So as long as you get it up to that, 160 for about 20 minutes, you're going to be good to go. So there you have it. That is how you make homemade sake. Hope you enjoy it. Hope you enjoyed this video. Subscribe. Click the button to follow along as we do all our DIY stuff. And there is me and Celine enjoying it for the first time. Cheers. I hope you like this video and follow along with all our other DIY adventures.